A millionaire abandoned his beloved to focus on his career 23 years later. When he saw her again, he was stunned by what he discovered. Click subscribe to learn more exciting stories like this and avoid 10 years of bad luck in love. The restaurant Starry Sky glowed with a golden radiance in the heart of the city. Its huge windows offered a panoramic view of the nightlights stretching as far as the eye could see. It was the favorite spot of the elite, where the tinkling of crystal glasses mingled with sophisticated laughter and hushed conversations. At a table by the window, Jack Morrison, a 50-year-old man, absently observed the city while waiting for his dinner. His hair, once black as ebony, was now sprinkled with grey that gave him a distinguished air. His eyes, an intense brown, reflected years of determination and success, but also a shadow of loneliness that not even college girlfriend was his anchor, his unconditional support. But when the opportunity to expand his business overseas presented itself, Jack found himself at a crossroads. Sarah wanted to settle down, start a family. He wanted to conquer the world. The final argument was brief, but devastating. Jack could still hear the echo of his own words. "I'm sorry, Sarah, but this is my chance. I can't let it pass." The sound of the door closing behind her resonated in his ears. Even after so many years, Jack shook his head, trying to push away the memories. He had convinced himself that he had made the right decision. His success was proof of that, wasn't it? But on nights like this, when the silence became deafening in his luxury penthouse, he couldn't help but wonder what if a movement at the restaurant entrance caught his attention. A woman had just entered, and Jack felt the world. Stop time seemed to rewind as he watched her. Her hair, now with some silver strands, still fell in soft waves over her shoulders. Her figure, though more mature, retained the grace and elegance that had always characterized her. It was her Sarah. Jack was paralyzed, unable to look away. 23 years vanished in an instant, and suddenly he was that young man in love again, his heart beating wildly in his chest. But Sarah wasn't alone. Next to her was a young man in his early 20s. Jack felt a pang of something he couldn't immediately identify. The young man was tall, athletic, with an air of confidence that seemed strangely familiar. When the young man turned his head slightly, Jack felt his breath catch. It was like looking in a mirror that reflected the past. The same brown eyes, the same strong jaw, even the way he smiled. It was a younger version of himself. The realization hit him with the force of a tidal wave. It wasn't possible, and yet there it was, right before his eyes. This young man, so similar to him, accompanying Sarah, could he be his son? The implications of that thought made him dizzy. If it was true, it meant that Sarah was pregnant when he left her. It meant there was a son, his son, that he never knew about, a son who had grown up without knowing him, without knowing who his father was. Guilt, regret, and a mix of emotions he couldn't name overwhelmed him. How could he have been so blind, so selfish? How could he have let his ambition blind him to the point of abandoning not only the love of his life, but also his own child? Jack watched with a mixture of fascination and horror as Sarah and the young man were led to a table not far from his. He saw how Sarah smiled with pride as she talked to her son, how the young man gestured animatedly as he told some story. At that moment, Jack Morrison, the real estate magnate, the man who had everything, realized that he actually had nothing that really mattered. All his wealth, all his success, seemed empty and meaningless in the face of the scene, unfolding before his eyes. With trembling hands, Jack picked up his wineglass and took a long drink, trying to calm the whirlwind of emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. He knew that this chance encounter, this twist of fate, was going to change his life forever. As he watched Sarah and the young man, a determination began to grow inside him. He didn't know how, he didn't know if it would be possible. But at that moment, Jack Morrison made a decision. He was going to do everything he could to repair the damage he had caused. He was going to fight to get to know his son, to earn a place in his life, and maybe, just maybe, he would have the chance to show Sarah that the love they once shared could still rise from the ashes. The waiter approached his table, asking if he was ready to order. Jack barely heard him. His mind was already making plans, imagining scenarios, preparing for the biggest challenge of his life, because he knew that what would come next would be much more difficult than any negotiation or acquisition he had faced in his career. This was the beginning of a new story, a story of redemption, second chances, and love lost and found, and Jack was determined not to make the same mistakes of the past. With one last look at the table where Sarah and his son were dining, Jack straightened in his chair. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but he was willing to travel it, because now he knew that some things were worth more than all the gold in the world. And he had spent too long ignoring what was truly important. The night was just beginning, and with it a new chapter in Jack Morrison's life, a chapter full of challenges, intense emotions, and the possibility of recovering what he once lost through his own blindness. The days following the encounter at the restaurant were a whirlwind of emotions for Jack. He couldn't get the image of Sarah and that young man, who he was almost certain was his son, out of his head. Guilt and regret were eating away at him, but he also felt a fierce determination to make things right. This time, after much hesitation and rehearsing in front of the mirror, Jack finally gathered the courage to contact Sarah. He got her number through some contacts, feeling that each ring was an eternity. When he finally heard her voice, he felt his heart stop. "Hello?" Sarah's voice sounded exactly as he remembered, perhaps a little more mature, but with the same warmth that had captivated him so many years ago. "Sarah, it's me, Jack." There was silence on the other end of the line, so long that for a moment he thought she had hung up. Jack. His name on Sarah's lips sounded like a mixture of surprise and something else he couldn't identify. "It's been many years." "I know," he replied, feeling the words catch in his throat. "I saw you at the Starry Sky restaurant a few days ago. You were with a young man." Another silence, this one even heavier than the previous one. "Yes, I was with Ryan, our son." The confirmation, although expected, hit him like a punch to the stomach. "Sarah? I didn't know, I swear, if I had known." "What, Jack?" Sarah's voice now had an edge he didn't remember. "Would you have given up your big dreams for us? Would you have stayed?" Firetins. Question left him speechless for a moment. Would he have? The Jack from 23 years ago probably wouldn't have, but the man he was now, "I don't know," he finally admitted. "But what I do know is that I made the biggest mistake of my life in letting you go, and now I want to make things right. I want to meet Ryan, if you'll allow me. I want to be part of his life." Sarah sighed deeply. "Jack, 23 years have passed. Ryan has grown up without a father, and now he's a man. You can't just show up and expect everything to be okay." I know," Jack said, the desperation clear in his voice. "I don't expect it to be easy, or for you to accept me right away. I'm just asking for a chance. Please, Sarah. At least let me try." There was another long silence before Sarah responded. "Okay, but on one condition. I'll talk to Ryan first. If he agrees to meet you, then you can. But if he says no, you have to respect his decision, understood?" "Yes, of course," Jack replied, feeling a mixture of relief and anxiety. "Thank you, Sarah, really. Thank you." After exchanging a few more details, the call ended. Jack stared at the phone in his hand, a storm of emotions stirring inside him. He had taken the first step, but he knew the road ahead would be difficult and full of obstacles. The following days were torture for Jack. He anxiously waited for news from Sarah while trying to concentrate on his work. But even the most important meetings seemed insignificant compared to the possibility of meeting his son. Finally, almost a week later, he received a message from Sarah. "Ryan has agreed to see you tomorrow, 3 p.m. at Central Park Cafe." Jack felt his heart skip a beat. This was his chance, and he was determined not to waste it. The next day, he arrived at the cafe, half an hour early. He sat at a table overlooking the park, his restless hands playing with the coffee cup he had ordered but couldn't drink. At 3 o'clock sharp, he saw them arrive. Sarah, as beautiful as ever, walked alongside Ryan. Seeing them together, now up close, made Jack feel a pang of pain for all the lost years. He stood up as they approached the table, feeling his legs trembling slightly. "Hello," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Sarah nodded in his direction, But it was Ryan who spoke first. "So you're my father," he said, his voice cold and distant. Jack nodded, unable to find the right words. Now that he had him in front of him, the similarity was even more striking. It was like looking in a mirror that reflected the past. They sat down, an uncomfortable silence falling over the table. Finally, Jack gathered the courage to speak. "Ryan, I know nothing. I can say we'll make up for the years I've been absent, but I want you to know that if you give me the chance, I'd like to be part of your life." Ryan stared at him, his eyes, so similar to Jack's, filled with a mix of emotions. "Why now?" he asked. "Why after so many years?" Jack took a deep breath. "Because I was a fool," he admitted. "Because I thought success and money were the most important things. But I was wrong, and now I realize everything I've missed. And you expect us to just accept you into our lives as if nothing had happened?" Ryan's voice was laden with resentment. "No," Jack replied. "I know it won't be easy. I know I'll have to earn a place in your life if you decide to give me that opportunity, and I'll understand if you don't want to. But I want you to know that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to show you that I care, that I deeply regret not being there for you all these years." Ryan kept his gaze fixed on Jack as if he were looking for something in his eyes. The silence stretched for what seemed like an eternity. Sarah, who had remained silent until now, finally intervened. "Ryan," she said softly, "I know this is difficult for you, but maybe, you should give him a chance." Ryan turned to his mother, surprised. "You think so?" "After everything we went through," Sarah sighed. "I've learned that holding grudges only hurts ourselves. I'm not saying you should forgive him immediately, but maybe listening to him could be a first step." Jack held his breath, waiting for Ryan's response. Finally, the young man turned back to look at him. "Okay," he said, his voice still cautious. "But let's be clear, this doesn't mean I'm accepting you as my father. I'm just willing to listen." Jack nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and anxiety. "Thank you, Ryan, it's more than I deserve." From that moment on, the conversation flowed slowly. Jack talked about his life, his career, and how, despite his professional success, he had always felt that something was missing. Ryan listened in silence, his expression unreadable. When the time came to talk about Ryan, the young man was reluctant at first, but gradually began to open up. He talked about his career in medicine, his passion for volunteering, and how Sarah had always been his rock. His unconditional support. Jack listened attentively to every word, his heart swelling with pride for the man his son had become, and at the same time breaking for everything he had missed. As the sun began to set, they decided to end the meeting. As they said goodbye, Jack gathered the courage to ask a question. "Ryan, do you think we could meet again?" Ryan looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Maybe I need time to process all of this. I'll let you know." Jack nodded, grateful even for that small possibility. As he watched Ryan and Sarah walk away, he felt a mixture of hope and determination. He knew the road would be long and difficult, but he was willing to travel it step by step to earn a place in his son's life. The weeks following the encounter at the cafe were a whirlwind of emotions. For everyone involved, Jack immersed himself in his work, trying to distract himself from the anxiety he felt every time he looked at his phone, waiting for news from Ryan. Sarah, for her part, found herself reliving old feelings she thought had been buried long ago. And Ryan was struggling with an internal storm of conflicting emotions. One afternoon, while Ryan was at the hospital doing his rounds as a pediatric resident, he received an unexpected call. It was Betty, his maternal grandmother. "Ryan, sweetheart," said Betty, her voice laden with concern. "Your mother told me about the meeting with Jack. How are you?" Ryan sighed, finding a quiet corner to talk. I don't know, Grandma, it's complicated. I know, my love. But there's something I think you should know. Something your mother never told you, and that might help you understand things better." Intrigued, Ryan listened as his grandmother revealed a part of the story he didn't know. It turned out that shortly after Jack left, Sarah had discovered she was pregnant. In a fit of wounded pride and pain, she had decided not to tell Jack. Your mother was devastated, Ryan, Betty explained. She thought that if Jack really loved her, he would have chosen to stay with her instead of pursuing his career. She didn't want him to come back just out of obligation. This revelation shook Ryan's world. He had always assumed that his father had abandoned them, knowing of his existence. Knowing that Jack never had the chance to choose to be part of his life, it was disconcerting. But Grandma, Ryan protested, that doesn't justify him never trying to contact us in all these years. You're right, honey, Betty conceded. Jack made many mistakes, but so did your mother. Sometimes pride and fear make us make decisions that hurt the ones we love the most. After hanging up, Ryan was left thoughtful. This new information didn't change the fact that he had grown up without a father, but it did shed new light on the situation. He decided he needed to talk to his mother. That night, in the apartment he shared with Sarah, Ryan confronted his mother. "Why did you never tell me?" he asked, his voice a mixture of pain and confusion. Sarah, surprised by the question, immediately knew what he was referring to. She sank into the sofa, tears welling up in her eyes. "Oh, Ryan, I'm so sorry. I was afraid. Afraid that if you knew, you'd hate me for denying you the chance to have a father." "Mom," said Ryan, sitting next to her and taking her hands, "I could never hate you. You've been my whole world. But don't you think I deserve to know the truth?" Sarah nodded, tears now freely flowing down her cheeks. "Yes, you did. I was wrong, son. I let my pain and my pride cloud my judgment. And as time passed, it became harder and harder to tell the truth." Ryan hugged his mother, feeling years of repressed emotions coming to the surface. "I love you, Mom. That's never going to change, but I think I need to give Jack a chance. Not for him, but for me. I need to get to know him, understand who he is, to better understand myself." Sarah pulled back slightly, looking at her son with a mixture of pride and sadness. "I understand, my love, and I'll support you in whatever you decide." Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Jack found himself in his office distractedly reviewing some documents. His mind, as had been frequent in recent weeks, was on Ryan and Sarah. It was then that his assistant entered, announcing an unexpected visit. "Mr. Morrison, there's someone here to see you. He says it's urgent." Jack looked up, intrigued. "Who is it?" "He says his name is Ryan Thompson." Jack's heart skipped a beat. Without thinking twice, he stood up from his chair. "Send him in, please." Moments later, Ryan entered the office. He looked nervous but determined. "We need to talk," he said, without preamble. Jack nodded, indicating for him to sit down. "Of course. Is everything okay?" Ryan took a seat, looking directly at Jack. "I just found out that you didn't know about my existence when you left. Is that true?" The question took Jack by surprise. "I know. I didn't know. If I had known, I swear that—" "Don't swear anything," Ryan interrupted. "I just want the truth. Why did you never try to contact my mother in all these years?" Jack sighed deeply. "At first I was focused on my career. I thought Sarah would be better off without me. And then time passed and it became harder and harder. I was afraid of discovering that she had rebuilt her life, that there was no place for me anymore. They were cowardly excuses, I know, and I deeply regret it." Ryan nodded slowly, processing the information. "Look, I'm not going to pretend this fixes everything. I grew up without a father, and that's something that can't be changed. But I'm willing to try to get to know you to see if we can build some kind of relationship." Jack's eyes lit up with hope. "Thank you, Ryan. I promise I'll do everything I can not to disappoint you." "Don't promise anything yet," Ryan warned. "Let's just take it step by step, okay?" Jack nodded, restraining the urge to hug his son. He knew he had a long way to go to earn his trust, but he was willing to do whatever it took. As Ryan prepared to leave, Jack gathered the courage to ask a question. "Ryan, do you think you could ever call me Dad?" Ryan stopped at the door, turning to look at Jack. For a moment, Jack saw in his eyes the child who once dreamed of having a father. "Maybe someday," he finally said, "but for now, Jack is fine." With that, Ryan left, leaving Jack with a mixture of hope and determination. He knew the road would be long and difficult, but for the first time in years, he felt he had a real chance to make amends for his mistakes and build the family he should have always had. The months that followed were a period of adjustment for everyone. Jack, Sarah, and Ryan began to navigate the uncharted waters of their new family dynamic. Each encounter, each conversation, was like walking on thin ice, with the constant tension of not knowing what to expect. Jack, true to his word, strived to demonstrate his commitment. He began attending Ryan's hospital shifts, bringing him coffee and sandwiches on long work nights. At first, Ryan was reluctant, but little by little, he began to appreciate these small gestures. On a particularly hectic night in the emergency room, Jack arrived with dinner for Ryan. He found him exhausted, dealing with a difficult case, a child who had come in with a complicated fracture. "How's it going?" Jack asked, handing him the bag with the food. Ryan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's complicated. The kid needs surgery, but his parents can't afford it." Jack frowned, thoughtful. "Can I help in any way?" Ryan looked at him, surprised. "Are you serious?" "Of course," Jack responded without hesitation. "If I can do something to help that child, I will." That night, Jack not only paid for the child's surgery, but also established a fund for similar cases at the hospital. Ryan, observing how his father used his wealth to help others, began to see a side of Jack he had never imagined. Meanwhile, Sarah watched the growing relationship between father and son with mixed emotions. On one hand, she was glad to see Ryan finally getting to know his father. On the other, she couldn't help but feel a pang of nostalgia, and perhaps something deeper that she dared not name. One afternoon, while Ryan was on call, Jack invited Sarah for coffee. Sitting in the same cafe where they had their first encounter months ago, the tension between them was palpable. "Sarah," Jack began, his voice soft but charged with emotion, "I know I've hurt you a lot, and I know it's probably too much to ask, but do you think you could ever forgive me?" Sarah looked at him, her eyes reflecting years of pain, but also a glimmer of something else. "Jack, so many years have passed, so many things have changed." "I know," he replied, "and I understand if it's too late, but I want you to know that I never stopped loving you. All these years, even when I was chasing my dreams, there was always a void in my life, a void that only you could fill." Sarah felt her heart racing. "Jack, But before she could continue, they were interrupted by the sound of her phone. It was Ryan, sounding agitated. "Mom, I need you to come to the hospital now. It's urgent." Sarah and Jack looked at each other, concern reflected in their faces. Without a word, they got up and headed to the hospital together. Upon arrival, they found Ryan in the waiting room, pale and visibly upset. "What's going on?" Sarah asked, hugging her son. Ryan took a deep breath before answering. "It's Grandma Betty. She had a heart attack. She's in surgery now." The world seemed to stop for Sarah. Betty, her mother, had been her rock all these years, especially when she found herself alone and pregnant. Jack, sensing Sarah and Ryan's distress, hugged them both instinctively. "I'm here for you," he said softly. "Whatever you need, just tell me." The following hours were agony. Sarah and Ryan anxiously waited for news, while Jack took care of everything else, from getting coffee and food to talking to the doctors to ensure Betty received the best possible care. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the surgeon came out to speak with them. "The operation was a success," he announced, to everyone's relief. "But the next 48 hours will be critical." Sarah collapsed into a chair, tears streaming down her cheeks. Ryan hugged her, while Jack knelt in front of her, taking her hands. "She's going to be okay, Sarah," he said softly. "Your mother is strong, just like you." Sarah looked at him, seeing in his eyes the same concern and love she remembered from years ago. At that moment, all the barriers she had built around her heart began to crumble. The days that followed were a blur of hospital visits, shifts to care for Betty, and moments of quietness in the waiting room. Jack remained constant, offering silent and practical support. He made sure Sarah and Ryan ate and rested, even when they insisted on staying by Betty's side one night. While Ryan was with his grandmother, Sarah and Jack found themselves alone in the hospital cafeteria. "Thank you," Sarah said softly, "for everything you're doing." Jack took her hand across the table. "You don't have to. Thank me, you are my family. I should have been here all this time." Sarah felt her heart race at Jack's touch. "You know, all these years I tried to convince myself that I had forgotten you. But seeing you now, how you are with Ryan, how you've been there for us in this difficult time, it makes me realize that I never stopped loving you." Jack's eyes filled with tears. "Sarah, But before he could continue, they were interrupted by Ryan, who came running. "Mom, Dad, Grandma woke up. She's asking for you." It was the first time Ryan had called Jack Dad, and the impact of that moment was not lost on any of them. With teary eyes and hearts full of emotion, they headed together to Betty's room. Betty's recovery was slow but steady. During that time, the dynamic between Jack, Sarah, and Ryan continued to evolve. Jack became a constant presence, not only at the hospital but also in their daily lives. One afternoon, while Betty was resting, Jack found himself alone with her in the hospital room. The woman looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "So," Betty began, her voice still weak but with a touch of irony, "the great Jack Morrison has returned." Jack shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Mrs. Betty, No, let me speak," she interrupted. "I've waited more than 2 decades to tell you a few things." Jack nodded, preparing himself for what was to come. "You broke my daughter's heart," Betty continued. "You left her alone when she needed you the most, and my grandson grew up without a father because of you." Each word was like a dagger to Jack, but he knew he deserved to hear them. "But," Betty added, softening her tone, "I also see how you've been here for them these past few weeks. I see how you look at Sarah as if time hadn't passed, and I see how you treat Ryan with so much love and regret." Jack felt tears welling up in his eyes. "I love them, Betty, all of you, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make amends for my mistakes if you give me the chance." Betty looked at him intently for a moment before extending her hand to him. "Well, it seems you'll have that chance. Don't waste it this time." Jack took her hand, feeling as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "I won't, I promise." Meanwhile, Sarah and Ryan had gone home to rest a bit. Sitting in the kitchen, they shared a coffee. In comfortable silence. "Mom," Ryan finally said, "what do you think about all this? About Dad coming back into our lives?" Sarah looked at her son, surprised by the use of the word Dad. "Honestly, honey, I'm as confused as you are. Part of me wants to believe that this time will be different, that he's really changed, but another part is afraid of getting hurt again." Ryan nodded, understanding. "I know I'm scared too, but what if this is our chance to be a real family?" Sarah smiled softly, caressing her son's cheek. "You're so wise, my love. I think you're right. Maybe it's time to give forgiveness and a new beginning a chance." That night, when Jack arrived at the apartment to relieve them in caring for Betty, he found Sarah and Ryan waiting for him. "Jack," Sarah began, "we've been talking, and we think that maybe it's time to try to be a family, all of us together." Jack's face lit up with a mixture of hope and disbelief. "Are you serious?" Ryan stepped forward. "Yes, we're serious, Dad." It was as if time stood. Still, Jack looked at his son, tears freely flowing down his cheeks. Without words, he opened his arms, and for the first time Ryan hugged him as a son hugs his father. Sarah watched them, her heart full of love and hope. When Jack extended an arm towards her, she didn't hesitate to join the family hug. However, despite this moment of happiness, they were all aware that the road ahead would not be easy. Years of absence and pain are not erased overnight, but they were willing to try, to rebuild the bridges that time and circumstances had destroyed. What none of them knew was that fate still had some surprises in store for them. Surprises that would test their newly formed family bond and force them to face uncomfortable truths from the past. As Betty recovered and the new family dynamic settled in, it seemed that things were finally falling into place for Jack, Sarah, and Ryan. However, as often happens when waters calm, long-buried secrets began to surface. One afternoon, while Jack was helping Betty organize some old papers at her house, he came across a box full of old letters. Curious, He picked one up and opened it, not imagining how its contents were about to shake the foundations of everything they thought they knew. "Betty," Jack called, his voice trembling, "what are these letters?" Betty approached, paling at the sight of what Jack was holding in his hands. "Oh my God," she whispered. "I never thought I'd see them again." Jack read the letter, his face going from confusion to shock. This can't be true." The letters revealed a truth that had remained hidden for decades. It turned out that, shortly after Jack left, Sarah had discovered she was pregnant. In her pain and confusion, she had written several letters to Jack, telling him about the pregnancy and asking him to come back. However, those letters were never sent. "Why?" Jack asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why were they never sent?" Betty closed her eyes, the weight of years of guilt falling upon her. "It was me," she admitted. "I intercepted the letters. Sarah was so heartbroken, and I was so angry with you I thought I was protecting her." Jack sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the revelation. All these years, he had believed that Sarah never tried to contact him, that she had decided to keep him away from his son's life. But the reality was very different. "We have to tell Sarah and Ryan," he finally said. Betty nodded, tears in her eyes. "I know, and I'll accept the consequences of my actions." That night, they gathered Sarah and Ryan at Betty's house. The atmosphere was charged with tension as Jack and Betty explained what they had discovered. Sarah listened in shock, her eyes moving from her mother to Jack. "I can't believe it," she finally said. "Mom, how could you?" "I'm so sorry, my girl," Betty cried. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I was so angry with Jack for hurting you." Ryan, for his part, remained silent, processing the information. Finally, he spoke. "So, all this time, it was all a misunderstanding." Jack approached his son. "Ryan, if I had known about your existence, I would have come back immediately. Nothing was more important to me than you two." Sarah, still in shock, looked at Jack. "But even without knowing about the pregnancy, why did you never try to contact me?" Jack lowered his gaze, ashamed. "At first, I thought you needed space. Then, when I tried to call a few months later, I was told you had moved and didn't leave a contact address. I assumed you wanted to leave the past behind." Silence fell over the room as everyone processed the implications of these revelations. Years of misunderstandings, decisions made with good intentions but disastrous consequences, had shaped their lives in ways they were only beginning to understand. "What now?" Ryan asked, breaking the silence. "How are we supposed to feel about all of this?" Sarah approached her son, taking his hand. "I don't know, honey, but I think we have to. Forgive ourselves and each other. It's the only way forward." Jack nodded, moving closer to them. "You're right. We can't change the past, but we can decide how we want our future to be." Betty, still crying silently in her chair, looked at them with a mixture of remorse and hope. "I'm so sorry," she repeated. "Will you ever be able to forgive me?" Sarah looked at her mother, years of love and gratitude struggling against the feeling of betrayal. Finally, she approached and hugged her. "We'll forgive you, Mom, but we'll need time." As the family embraced, they were all aware that this discovery had changed everything. The wounds of the past, which were just beginning to heal, had been reopened. But there was also a new opportunity for honesty and reconciliation. What none of them knew was that this revelation was just the beginning. There were more secrets buried in the past, secrets that would soon come to light and test the family ties they were trying to rebuild. The days following the revelation of the letters were tense and emotional for the entire family. Each of them dealt with the new information differently. Sarah alternated between anger towards her mother and sadness for the lost years. Ryan immersed himself in his work at the hospital, trying to process his emotions, while Jack struggled between the joy of knowing that Sarah had wanted him to be part of their lives and the guilt for not having fought harder to find her. One afternoon, as Jack was walking through the park near the hospital trying to clear his thoughts, he encountered a familiar figure. "Jack," called a female voice. "Is that you?" Jack turned, surprised to recognize the woman. "Lisa, Wow, it's been so long. Lisa smiled, approaching. Almost 20 years, if I'm not mistaken. What brings you here? Jack hesitated for a moment before responding. It's a long story. I'm reconnecting with my family. Lisa's eyes widened in surprise. Your family, you mean? Yes, Jack nodded. Sarah and my son, Ryan. Lisa visibly paled at the mention of Ryan. Oh my God, Jack. There's something you need to know. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Ryan found himself in the middle of an emergency situation. A patient had arrived with a rare condition that required experimental treatment. Ryan, known for his brilliance and dedication, was chosen to lead the procedure. As he prepared for surgery, he couldn't help but think about how his life had changed in recent months. His father's reappearance, the revealed secrets, the new family dynamic, everything seemed like a whirlwind of emotions. However, at that moment he had to focus on saving a life. Back in the park, Jack looked at Lisa with a mixture of confusion and apprehension. What is it that I need to know, Lisa? Lisa took a deep breath before speaking. Years ago, shortly after you left, Sarah and I ran into each other. She was devastated, pregnant and alone. I offered her money to leave town, to start a new life away from here. Jack felt the world come to a standstill. What? Why would you do something like that? Because I loved you, Jack, Lisa confessed, tears welling up in her eyes. I thought that if Sarah disappeared, you'd come back, and maybe we'd have a chance. It was selfish and terrible. I know I've lived with that guilt for years. Jack stepped back, overwhelmed by this new revelation. My God, Lisa, do you have any idea what you've done? You robbed us of years of being together as a family. I know, Lisa sobbed, and I'm so sorry. When I found out you were back and reconnecting with them, I knew I had to tell you the truth. I can't keep living with this secret. Jack ran a hand through his hair, trying to process this new information. I have to tell Sarah and Ryan they need to know the truth. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Ryan was coming out of the operating room, exhausted but triumphant. The surgery had been a success, and the patient was stable. As he was taking off his surgical gown, he saw his mother running towards him, a worried expression on her face. Ryan, Sarah said, out of breath. It's your grandmother. She had a relapse. She's in intensive care. Ryan's heart sank. Just when he thought things couldn't get more complicated, fate threw them another curveball. Let's go, he said, taking his mother's hand. We need to be with her. As they headed to the intensive care unit, Ryan received a message from Jack. We need to talk. It's urgent. I'll be at the hospital in 20 minutes. Ryan frowned, wondering what new surprise awaited them. It seemed that the universe was determined to test the bonds of their newly reunited family. In the intensive care unit, they found Betty connected to several machines. The doctor in charge informed them that she had suffered a stroke and that the next few hours would be critical. Sarah collapsed into a chair next to her mother's bed, taking her hand. Mum, please, you have to be strong. We need you. Ryan put a hand on his mother's shoulder, offering silent comfort. At that moment, Jack arrived, his face a mask of concern and guilt. Sarah, Ryan, he said softly, I know this isn't the best time, but there's something you need to know. As Jack told them about his encounter with Lisa and the truth she had revealed, Sarah and Ryan listened in shock. It was as if the ground beneath their feet was crumbling once again. I can't believe it, Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. So many lies, so many secrets. When will it all end? Ryan, for his part, felt a growing anger. Did no one think about me? About how all these decisions would affect my life? Jack approached his son, trying to put a hand on his shoulder, but Ryan stepped away. I'm so sorry, son. If I could, change the past. But you can't, Ryan interrupted, his voice trembling with emotion. None of us can. And now Grandma is fighting for her life, and we keep discovering more and more lies. How are we supposed to handle all of this? At that moment, the machines connected to Betty began to sound, her heart rate becoming erratic. Ryan, switching into doctor mode, quickly called for an emergency team. As the doctors worked frantically to stabilize, Betty, Sarah, Jack, and Ryan clung to each other, all recriminations and pain momentarily forgotten in the face of the possibility of losing a loved one. Amidst the chaos and uncertainty, one thing became clear. Despite all the secrets and lies, despite the pain and betrayal, they were a family, and they would have to find a way to overcome this together, or risk losing everything once again. As they waited for news about Betty's condition, each of them faced their own inner demons. Sarah struggled with the guilt of keeping Ryan away from his father for so many years, even if it hadn't been entirely her decision. Jack wondered if he could ever make up for all the lost years, and if his family could ever fully forgive him. And Ryan, caught in the middle of it all, grappled with the love for his family, and the feeling that his entire life had been built on a foundation of lies. What none of them knew was that fate still had one last surprise in store for them, a surprise that would test their love, loyalty, and capacity for forgiveness like never before. The hours turned into days as Betty fought for her life in the intensive care unit Sarah, Jack, and Ryan took, turns staying by her side, their own conflicts momentarily forgotten in the face of the gravity of the situation. One night, as Ryan was taking his turn keeping vigil, Betty began to show signs of improvement. Slowly, she opened her eyes, focusing on her grandson's face. "Ryan," she whispered, weakly. "Grandma," Ryan responded, tears welling up in his eyes. "You're awake, thank God." Betty tried to speak again, but Ryan gently stopped her. "Don't strain yourself, Grandma. Rest, I'll go get the doctor and call Mom and Dad." The word Dad came out of his lips with less resistance this time, and Ryan realized that despite everything, Jack had earned that title in the past few months. As they waited for the results of Betty's tests, the family gathered in the waiting room. The silence between them was heavy, laden with all the unspoken truths and repressed emotions of the past few days. Finally, it was Ryan who broke the silence. "We can't go on like this," he said, looking at his parents. "This whole situation, all these secrets and lies, they're destroying us." Sarah and Jack exchanged a glance before nodding. "You're right, son," Jack said. "I think it's time we all put our cards on the table. No more secrets, no more lies." And so, in that cold hospital waiting room, the family began to talk. Sarah confessed her fear and wounded pride that led her not to seek out Jack even after her mother intercepted the letters. Jack admitted his cowardice in not fighting harder to find them, letting his career fill the void in his life. Ryan, for his part, spoke of his resentment at growing up without a father, but also of his gratitude towards his mother for everything she had sacrificed for him. He talked about his fear of fully trusting Jack, but also of his desire to have a real relationship with his father. Tears flowed freely as each of them exposed their deepest wounds, their darkest fears, and their most sincere hopes. It was a painful process, but also cathartic. With each truth revealed, each apology offered and accepted, the walls between them began to crumble. It was in the midst of this conversation that the doctor arrived with news about Betty. "Your mother is out of danger," he announced, addressing Sarah. "The recovery will be slow, but we expect a full improvement." The news was received with hugs and tears of relief. In that moment of shared joy, something changed in the family dynamic. It was as if the relief over Betty's recovery had opened a door to healing for all of them. The following days were a period of transition and adjustment. Betty was moved to a private room, where the family spent most of their time. The conversations continued, this time including Betty, who also had her own apologies to offer and forgiveness to ask for. It was during one of these conversations that Jack made a decision that would change the course of their lives once again. "I've been thinking," he began, looking at Sarah and Ryan. "All these years I've pursued success and wealth, thinking that would fill the void in my life. But now I realize that the only thing that really matters is family." He paused, taking Sarah and Ryan's hands. "I want to sell the company. Use the money to establish a foundation that helps families in need, especially single mothers and fatherless children, and I want us to do it together as a family." The proposal was met with initial surprise but soon turned into enthusiasm. Ryan saw an opportunity to use his medical skills to help others, while Sarah thought of all the women who could benefit from support she didn't have. The following months were a whirlwind of activity. Jack sold his company, Sarah quit her job to dedicate herself full-time to the foundation, and Ryan divided his time between the hospital and organizing health programs for the foundation. The Morrison Foundation quickly became a beacon of hope for many families in difficult situations. It offered financial, medical, and emotional support, becoming a model of how wealth and privilege could be used to make a real difference in people's lives. A year after the crisis that nearly destroyed their family, Jack, Sarah, and Ryan found themselves at the inauguration of the Foundation's first community center. As they cut the ribbon together, Jack couldn't help but reflect on the long and difficult road that had brought them there. "It's never too late to do the right thing," he said, addressing the gathered crowd. "It's never too late to ask for forgiveness, to offer a second chance, to rebuild what has been broken." He looked at Sarah and Ryan, his eyes shining with love and pride. "My family gave me a second chance, and now we want to offer that same opportunity to others, because in the end, the only thing that really matters is the love and connection we share with others." That night, as the family had dinner together at home, with Betty presiding over the table, there was a feeling of peace and fullness that none of them had experienced before. They had gone through the fire of adversity and had emerged stronger, more united. Sarah looked at Jack and smiled, love shining in her eyes. "You know, I think I finally understand what happily ever after means. It doesn't mean everything is perfect all the time. It means that whatever happens, we face it together." Jack took her hand, kissing it softly. "Together," he repeated, "always." Ryan watched his parents, feeling a wave of gratitude and love. "Who would have thought we'd end up like this when we first met a year ago?" Betty laughed softly. "Fate has mysterious ways of working, my boy. Sometimes we have to go through the worst to appreciate the best." As the family continued their dinner, laughing and sharing stories, it became clear that they had found something precious, a love that had withstood the test of time and adversity, a connection that was stronger than any secret or lie from the past. And so, on an ordinary night, in a house filled with love and laughter, the story of Jack, Sarah, and Ryan came to an end, not with fireworks or grand declarations, but with the quiet certainty that, whatever happened, they would face the future together, as the family they were always meant to be.